Today's guest in the podcast is Patrick Stepanek. Patrick has written a book called Utopian Logic, which, as he states, is an all-encompassing look into collective humanity and the direction it is headed. Patrick is also behind the Natural United Instagram pages. I'll post a link to Natural Ohio in the description. Patrick and I talk about some cool personal stories, and we discuss what it takes to do the things you dream of doing. Enjoy the podcast. So, per usual, what experiences set in motion your biggest personal revelation? So what was the event? What was the thing? What was your revelation, and how is that impacting you today? And I'm going to give you my example because before this, we were talking a little bit about it, and I never mentioned this on stream before. So when I was sophomore in college, it was January of 2017, and I just came home from a cruise, or I was on my way back from a cruise. And we were at the Fort Lauderdale airport, and our plane was like an hour away from taking off. And I had my headphones in, and I was like playing a game on my phone, and we were at the gate. So like my back was turned to the gate, and my sisters were like talking amongst themselves. And like my one cousin was in a whole other terminal, and then my parents just got on a plane with my grandpa to go to Detroit, so they were safe, like they were gone. So it's just me, my sisters, and my one cousin. So I was sitting there with my headphones in, and I was like facing like the food court, and I had like this urge as I was looking down on my phone. I had this urge to like look up, and I just see like this stampede of people. Like mind you, like 30 seconds earlier, it was normal. And then like I look up again, and there's a stampede of people. So the first thing my brain does is like, there isn't supposed to be a stampede here by the gate. So I just like started like freaking out. So I like instinctively hopped up on like the chairs by the gate and to try to get like a clearer view of like the stampede. But when I looked, it was just blurry. I was like, what's going on? So I like jumped down, and when I jumped down, I tripped, and I like smashed my knee on this metal balance that was like holding up this barricade, and I didn't feel anything. And then like that night, it was like black, like my knee was like insanely bruised. So like the adrenaline already kicked in at that point. So they let us into the plane. They let like 4 of us into the plane preemptively, and the pilot and the flight attendants were like, "What are you doing here?" Like everyone was super frantic, and so they didn't shut the gate, they didn't shut the door down, but they let us in there. And off the bat, they said the pilot heard from someone that there was a shooter in the food court, and we were just at the food court. So it was like, that makes sense too, because there was a stampede of people. So they made us get off of the plane and go to the tarmac. And when we were on the tarmac, like everyone was screaming and crying. No one knew what was going on. And they said there's going to be a bus that is going to loop around and take us back to security, so we can go through security again, and then hopefully we can make to our plane. So no one really knew what was going on at that point. And this took like an hour. So we were on the tarmac for like an hour, and then they just said, you can just go back to your gate. So we never went back to security, and all we did was just walk up, back up the emergency exit. And so everyone was like, that's kind of weird. You know what I mean? It's like a little suspect. Like no one went through security again. It was just odd. So this time I sit by all of my belongings, because I forgot my backpack the first time because it was like such a rush. But this time I had like everything like in a place. I had my phone in my pocket. I was just sitting there like with my arms folded, and I was like, the chances of something happening again are minimal, but I don't want to take any chances. But no more than 10 minutes later, like I heard the screaming this time, and it was like this lady just like had like this banshee scream. And I was the first person to just run and dip to the emergency exit. And I like ran down the steps, and I was on the tarmac, and my sisters were right behind me. And I guess at this point there was a shooter in another terminal. That was like the intel that we were getting. So the creepy part about being in such like a panicky event is that all the intel people get is mostly false. Like 90% of it isn't even real. So when we were on the tarmac, there was one point where we were behind one of those little luggage trucks, and they said that there were snipers in the parking garage. Like a TSA agent So there are snipers in the parking garage, and that if we get out of cover, we're gonna get shot. So now that I'm saying this story, they could have said that because they wanted us to take cover no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But they also told us that, which is sort of crazy. So we were all laying prone on the hot ass Florida heat tarmac, and this TSA agent who had a walkie-talkie on her side, a voice came through the walkie-talkie and said that the shooter is coming towards you. So everyone there was like, okay, well, this is it. Like, like no one knew what's going on. The shooter's coming towards us. No TSA agents have any like weapons. Um, and the one thing that I learned there and then was that a it was one of those movie moments where your back is against the wall and you don't really have any other options. So I was anticipating me to like break into prayer. You know what I mean? Like, this is all I can do. Like, let me just say my last prayers just in case anything bad happens. But when I tried to pray, it felt so unnatural, and my body was just looking for more solutions. Like my mind wouldn't even let me pray, and so it was like this really weird instinct that like my like capacity to continue problem solving when things look like there are no solutions is like nearly infinite. I mean, I'm not saying that like I have the capacity to solve any problem, but I'm saying like my will and like the grit was much more higher than I thought. And to sort of go to like part B is that at the same time I was super calm. So I didn't do any heroic shit, even though I was living through like um like a like a daydream essentially. Like that's like sometimes people daydream about them being those certain scenarios. Um, but I was like extremely calm. So under like the most stress I was ever under, I kept it together, and I realized like those valuable things. So walking away from that experience, I give up. I shouldn't say I give up later. I almost never consider giving up until I literally have no options left. And not giving up is like the key to succeeding in your dreams, period. Like if you don't give up, by definition, you will succeed. So
Yeah.
that helped me finish out losing weight. That helped me like finish out like all of these goals that I thought were unreachable. But at the end of the day, it was just me saying like, as long as I don't give up and I keep chipping at it, it'll like I will reach that point that I want to get to.
Yeah,
So
I feel like traumatic experiences often can lead people to have a greater appreciation for life.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, that's the gist of it. So
Wow, that's an incredible story. Obviously, very tragic, but I do think coming away from that after it's already happened, there's nothing that you can do about it. You do kind of look back on A, everything that led you to get to that point in your life, and B, it's like, okay, well, now that this has happened, what's the path that I'm going to go? Um, I like that you said that it made you persistent. Because that wouldn't necessarily be what I would have thought you would have taken away from that situation, but I do think there is something to be said about having the patience to be persistent, because you look at most of the people who have become masters of something, and their first work isn't necessarily good, so they had to get from that first work to mastery somehow.
right, that's true.
But unbelievable. I mean, very few people have experiences like that where they're part of something that is on national news that everyone knows about as uh, a wild event that is unusual, but are things that people kind of are afraid of all the time. But a question that I'd have for you after hearing that story, because I didn't even know that this has happened to you, but
Mm-hmm.
when you go past that later on in life, have you felt the same chemicals in your brain, but to a lesser extent?
You mean like the stress?
Yeah, like do you feel like it's the same stuff, just maybe not as strong?
Oh, I see what you mean. Um, oddly enough, well, I'll say when it was happening, it felt like my emotions were drained. So it was like whatever the amount of stress that I was feeling was so high that that was the only thing I could feel. Like I didn't feel any negative emotion. I felt like complete apathy after that. So when I was experiencing that in the time after, it was I was more so reflecting on that apathy and like that lack of emotion than I was actually like worried about the stress. Just because like it was just so novel that I wasn't actually feeling any emotions at all. You know what I mean?
You
So
were in
to answer,
shock.
what's that?
You were in shock, like emotional shock.
Yeah, I guess it was just like complete numbness, and so that was more intriguing to me than it was the stress. But to go for the stress thing is that my stress tolerance was just insane after that. Like my that semester I came back, it was like 18 credit hours, but it was like all like high level chemistry and physics classes, and like I remember having one panic attack my freshman year of college, and I was just like anticipating another one eventually. But after that, my stress tolerance was so high that like I was able to like sleep like a baby, and like it was weird. It was almost like anti PTSD, but there
Yeah.
were some like PTSD aspects that would occur later. So like to give you an example, like my baseline stress was way lower, but odd things would trigger. Like if I was in CVS and like an anomalous thing would happen, like someone put in their pin wrong in front of me, I would get like this huge jolt of shock. Like now I have to wait longer in this public place. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
tiny things. It's like someone messed up and now I have to be here longer than I have to be, and that's like increasing the like probability that something bad, you know, could happen. But that sort of dwindled over time, I guess.
Uh-huh. What happened with your relationship with fear?
With fear,
Yeah. Do you feel like you're a more or less frightful person having been in an absurd, wild runoff situation like that?
you know what's weird is because those if someone told me beforehand like you're gonna be in a mass shooting today, I would be like scared shitless. I would like be clutching my phone, my heart would be racing. But when it actually happened, it it was weird. So like now that you bring that up,
Yeah.
it's one of those things that it makes me really cognizant of every single thing that I worry about when it actually comes into fruition. It's not even it's like I'm almost glad that the worst case scenario happened because it's not that I'm glad. It's like
Can
I'm
I read a
okay with it.
quote?
I accepted it. What's that?
Can I read a quote for you?
Sure.
I have actually a book on my desk. I wasn't planning on doing this, but it exactly what you were just saying. It applies to that.
Perfect.
Are you familiar with who Osho is?
No.
So he is a very, very famous Indian guru. I think he's from the 80s when he was popularized. But he started this civilization in India, and eventually, like, thousands of people ended up moving to it to the point where they kicked him out of India. He bought 60,000 acres of land in Oregon and ended up starting a cult with 50,000 people there. He has a bunch of wildlife philosophies, but this is the intro of his book, and it reminds me exactly of what you're talking about, which is the idea of things that you're fearful of when they actually conceptualize aren't nearly as bad as you made them out to be in your head.
Yes.
So it says, go into your fear. Silently enter into it so you can find its depth. And sometimes it happens that it is not very deep. A Zen story is, a man is walking in the night, slipped and fell from a rocky path. Afraid he would fall down thousands of feet because he knew that just at the edge of the path was a very deep valley, he grabbed hold of a branch that was overhanging the edge. In the darkness of the night, all he could see below him was bottomless abyss. He shouted, and his own shout was reflected back. There was nobody to hear him. You can imagine that man and his whole night of torture. Every moment there was death below. His hands were becoming cold. He was losing his grip. But he managed to hold on, and as the sun came out, he looked down, and he laughed. There was no abyss. Just 6 inches below his feet, there was a rock ledge. He could have rested the whole night, slept well. The ledge was big enough, but instead, the whole night was a nightmare. From my own experience, I can say to you, the fear is not more than 6 inches deep. Now it is up to you whether you want to go on climbing to that branch and turn your life into a nightmare, or whether you would love to leave the branch and stand on your feet. There is nothing to fear.
Yeah, I like that for sure.
So I think, your initial response to the situation was instinctual, where your ancestors got here somehow, and they managed to escape situations that were probably substantially more dangerous than that.
Right.
So I think oftentimes it's easy to forget how well prepared we are to respond to protect ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. Like have been optimized over hundreds of thousands of years to, deal with these sort of life and death situations. And my uncle said something really profound to me one time that actually helped me get over the majority of like the trauma aspect, is that like I experienced like a test or like a life experience that the vast majority of human beings will never be able to experience and learn like their true capacity under that certain circumstance. So for whatever reason, I felt like blessed. I was like, I'm actually really grateful that I got to experience that, because now that it's over, stuff like that quote is like deeply embedded into my belief system because I went through it.
Yeah, much more difficult to phase you, where it's like if that's kind of your ceiling of experience, you're comparing different things that happen to you. And, before something right here would have happened, you would have been like, oh my gosh, that was ridiculous. But now that you've been here, it's like anything below, you're kind of going to compare it to that. And so I try to think of when you kind of frame the question to me, what set my life in motion and what have been the events that have been defining and have, helped me to kind of like learn and see what paths I want to take. There are a few things that come to mind. The first two, just kind of off the top of the bat, reaching 1 million people on Natural. So I have this community of photographers, hikers, and it's an internet community. And when we reached 1 million people in the community, I started to realize that, I had really created something that was beyond myself and also had an impact much greater than I ever could have anticipated when I first started it. So I'll get into that. And then secondly, when I published my book, that completely revolutionized my life. It completely changed the course of my life and opened a lot of doors that I didn't know were going to be there, but now that they are, I'm super grateful for them. So,
okay.
Those two events are not nearly as traumatizing, and I really haven't anything that
they don't need to be.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about Natural or what?
What's that?
Can I ask you a question about the 1 million followers real quick?
Mm-hmm.
When did you first start Natural Ohio, and then how long did it take for you to get 1 million across all Natural?
Yeah. So 2014, I started just the Ohio page. And then after I realized that it was a really interesting concept and it started growing and doing a bunch of things I didn't originally anticipate it to. So I wanted to make it a platform for me to share cool places that I went, and allow other people to kind of put their interesting hikes on the page. And then slowly we could build up a repertoire of the cool things to do in Ohio. So after Ohio started doing super well, I started it in Michigan, started it in Pennsylvania. So that was 2014. And then I started as a freshman at Ohio State in 2015. And at this point, I was doing a new state every week or two, reaching out to people there saying, hey, I'm starting this page. I have it in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York. And it kept growing. But to get to 1 million, it was longer than 5 years. But I could grow 100,000 now, and it would be much, much easier than the initial 1,000 people. That was the hardest part. And, you always hear that. People say the hardest part is starting. I think starting's pretty easy because it's fun and it's exciting, but getting that first step of progress where it's like, okay, now we have a 4-digit, community number of people.
Yeah.
That was really difficult. And obviously with social media, it's completely revolutionized the game. Like if I were to try to talk to 1 million people 100 years ago, there might not even have been 1 million people in my country.
Yeah.
Whereas now, we kind of have access to the whole world straight from our fingertips. So you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, but it was gradual. And what I did is I'm a big believer in A/B testing. I'll do one thing and see what happens. I'll do the other thing and see what happens. And whichever I like the outcome of better, I'll double down on. And that's kind of how I did build it up to 1 million from zero, from scratch.
Okay. So, actually, before I get into the questions, like the deeper questions about that, for your book, I want to get into that first, because a book is one of those huge tests in itself, is that it takes, months and months of delaying gratification and writing pages that you're not getting paid for yet. And I want to know, before you even got a public reception of it, what were your feelings when you had like the complete product?
Well, so it's about 350 pages, and I had always had each of those different concepts trapped in my head, and I didn't necessarily always know that I wanted to manifest it in book form, but all of those different ideas have been circulating in my head, some for longer than others. And my brother lived in South Korea for 4 years, so the way that we would hang out, we'd meet up in Hawaii. It was literally the easiest way for us to hang out, meet halfway in between. And I was on the way back from Hawaii, and I had a long flight ahead of me, and I thought, why don't I actually just try to get this started? I've always had all these ideas in my head. I'm just going to get it all down in my laptop on paper. And I wrote 20 pages on that flight back, and from there it set in motion every single day. For at least an hour or two, I was doing research on one of the topics. The setup of the book is 33 different chapters. Each is a different chapter, like finance, infrastructure, all sorts of different things, philosophy. And when I published it, before anyone had read it, I'd shown it to people, and people were super excited. I felt like people were very surprised that someone my age would have, A, that sort of wisdom, and B, a lot of the ideas are fairly new and unique to me. And so when I put that book out, it was the first time I created anything entirely by myself, where I was super proud of something, and I felt like I could go hand it to someone, and it would be an explanation as to, who I am, what I stand for, and truthfully, the types of things that I think about.
Okay. So there's a lot of different ways that we can go from there. I think I'm going to ask you a similar question like you asked me, in that, how did that change your, I guess, threshold for tackling new things you want to do after writing an entire book?
Yeah, because when you're writing it, you do have that second thought in the back of your head, which is, no one's going to enjoy this. These are just the ramblings of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And within 2.5 days of me putting it on Amazon, I hadn't even advertised it. I've got a platform of 1 million people on the internet. I haven't even advertised it there yet. And it became a bestseller in the nature and philosophy categories on Amazon.
That's insane.
Yeah, dude. It was like nearly like top 100 in a few of the categories, which I'm hoping to continue to write throughout the rest of my life and add to the library of books that I've written. But just having something out there that was a representation of me, and other people were enjoying and sharing with their friends and saying, hey, my friend wrote this book, you'd like it, and seeing the 5-star reviews come in, it made me realize, in other moments of self-doubt, maybe I should pull the trigger a little bit more extensively and try something out. Even if it doesn't work out, maybe I need to leave myself time to experiment, to try new things, to do things, and push new boundaries on myself to see what I can create. So
For sure.
I've got my second book that I'm actually hoping to send in for publishing this weekend.
Wow.
And that definitely was set in motion by the first one, because I knew I wanted to write multiple books, but when the first one did so well and the reception for it was so good, it sprung me into action of, oh, well, I have a dozen more ideas of things that I can do in all different sorts of areas of writing.
Very cool. Okay. So the one thing that you said that I thought was really important is doing it, like pulling the trigger regardless of how it might turn out. I think that's like one of the coolest things that anyone can do. And I think a lot of people think that their ideas might not be received well, but I think the act of doing it is, if not the majority, like half of the importance of the creation or whatever you know what I mean? Like it's...
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I always like to look at it this way, that, there's a lot of risk in putting 350 pages of your thoughts out in the world in your reading.
Yes.
That being said, there's, in my view, the most risky thing that you can do is be complacent and do nothing. And, this is something where I feel like if you were to look into it, rather, even if you were to not like what I was saying, even if you disagreed with my perspectives, my theories, the research in it is respectable. And it's definitely, if you were to give that book to a high school student, I think it would expand their world of thinking and what they know about the world greatly. So, ultimately, it was worth the risk for me. I'm going through and kind of revising some stuff and changing up the way I say things to make it more transparent and easy for people to understand. But ultimately, it's something I'm super proud of. And I would advise people, whatever your craft is, make something that you're proud of on a daily basis. And that's really helped me. It makes me more grateful. It makes me more happy. And it makes, everyone has swings of emotions. And it makes, when I've sad thoughts running through my head, they go away quicker when I have something to get my mind working on.
For sure. I have two things to say to that. And one is, no matter, whatever you do, you're eventually going to get good at it. So if you do something daily, you're going to get good at it. And the second thing is, when you do something daily, you eventually find like your style. So I know a lot of people don't like when it comes to like making YouTube videos, they don't really have like a style that feels natural to them, and they don't really know what they want to do with their channel. But if you sort of get yourself into a habit of, contributing at least once a day or once a week, like in a set schedule, it's gonna be a snowball effect. So yeah. I know a lot of people like me, like you, like a lot of people from Hudson who grew up very smart and didn't have to study in high school. And then once they got to college, a lot of us were afraid of failure. And so we didn't even study because we didn't want to study, give some effort in, and then fail and get a shitty grade. So one of the things that sort of transformed my life, getting over that fear of failure that, sort of stemmed from those days of being ahead of the curve, like back in the day, is doing something on a daily basis, no matter how shitty it is, because eventually it's going to be amazing and you're going to learn a lot about yourself.
Yeah. People come to me often saying, I want to get into the habit of reading. What would you recommend that I do? And I just say, read 1 page a day. They're like, that sounds really dumb. And it's like, once you have read that 1 page, you'll be surprised how often you want to read 2 or 3 chapters. And from there, once you make it a habit of doing it when you wake up and go to bed, you'll see it's not going to just be 1 page, but hold yourself to that 1 page and you'll be surprised what happens,
Yes.
Like you were talking about earlier, the value in consistency. I do think being a persistent person who's willing to show up every day says a lot about your character and your willingness to set aside, because, we always know everyone's fighting their own battles to some degree of something. And it's people who are willing to put that aside to achieve what they want in their life that end up being masters and great at whatever it is they do.
For sure. I think grit is probably the most valuable trait that anyone can have, especially nowadays. I feel like people give up so fast, and people are looking for.
You know who Angela Duckworth is?
Huh?
You know who Angela Duckworth is?
No.
You have to check it out. She got super famous for writing a book called Grit.
Okay, I'll check it out.
It's one of those classic self-help books.
Okay. But yeah, dude, like that's because I know that people. I mean, we live in like a. I would call it like, you're under, it's like living in a fishbowl, especially with social media. So if you do put yourself out there, people are going to see if you fail. So if you have grit, it's one of the most admirable traits, especially like if you want to be a leader, if you are a leader and you have grit, I think like that's like the cornerstone of any leader in any group. So
yeah,
for sure.
I'm with you.
I want to talk about sacrifice, because writing a book 350 pages in school requires sacrifice. So I want to hear what you have to say about that time that you won't get back, and if it was worth it or not.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I probably still would have done it even if I weren't given the opportunity to share it with people as easily as I was. With everything that I've ever done in my life, there's been something I've had to give up. We were talking about risk earlier, where it's like everything that you do is a risk, even doing nothing. For me, giving up that time daily, it was there were some days where I didn't want to do it, and ultimately what got me through those is I would go back to an earlier chapter, I'd read 1 paragraph and think to myself, I could think of something equally as brilliant but what I'm writing about right now. And it provided me with skills beyond writing. I think the ability to accomplish things, the amount of different things that I looked into, a lot of things that I learned in the process of writing that book are not in that. And it was a path of personal evolution where, since I was trying to present myself professionally over 350 pages, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just putting in everything that I knew. I wanted to know much more than I was actually talking about, and condense it and make it something that for people that they feel like they can actually understand it. And so the sacrifice of it for me was, if you read this book and you hate my character, then I'm going to have to understand that's a consequence of me sharing my thoughts with the world. But at the same time, my thought process is this: I'm fairly open-minded. I'm willing to have a conversation with anyone. I think that you can learn from literally every single human being alive on the planet. And so I prefer to have conversations with people that think that way. But, I look forward to that first 1-star review because I'm curious what they're going to say.
Yeah. I think so it seems like a big motivator for yourself is outdoing yourself. Does that resonate?
Yeah. I love to hike. Hiking's been my favorite thing to do with my time for a very long time now. And I remember when I first would hike, I would be very frustrated because I would want to do something, but I wouldn't be physically capable of doing it. And I would consider writing a book to be the exact same, but with the mental fortitude to actually get your thoughts on paper in a cohesive. So when I first started going in and typing, I was really surprised I got 20 pages down. The second time I went in, I realized once I didn't have that starter's high, that it was actually pretty difficult to say things in a way that is both interesting and insightful and accurate. And so I always try to think of this, like, this sounds very, very cliche, but I think that because there's a good amount of truth in it. But what is my highest self? Like, if I were being a person who I've always dreamed I would be, what would that person be doing? And that applies to really everything, because you can easily get into the habit of doing things that aren't going to lead you into that progression. But it's very easy to flip it over, because you can just kind of acknowledge how you're spending your time, which is, if you're doing something for 2 hours a day that isn't getting you where you want to go, literally all you have to do is switch that 2 hours out with something that is going to transform your life and bring you to the revolutionary point you've been looking to get at. And I think you always have to understand, if you want to get to from point A to point B, it's not a daily thing. Like, most good things are going to take consistent energy over the course of months, if not years. So I always just try to be as patient as possible, then also honest with myself about what is that highest self? Like, what would I really want to be doing with my time? And if I look at, I'm the 24th as of today, if I look at my life and I'm 30, what am I going to have to do with my time, with my energy, with my brain, so that I can get to that point? What are the different steps that I'm going to have to take, almost like it's a checklist? And then there's bonus points at the end, too, of other things I'd love to do as well. And writing a book was one of those. It wasn't the main aspect of my life, but it was certainly one of those things where it was like, man, if I could check that box, it would be super fulfilling and probably help me in other areas of my life, too.
Yeah. I hear you. I think one of the coolest things that, one of the cool revelations I learned when I was losing weight is that all of like the hedonistic sort of things that we do for like 2 hours a day don't even manifest itself in something cool the next day. Whereas like, and there's no residual happiness from those hedonistic things you did for that time. But when you do something like read a book that you learn from for 2 hours a day, or you like contribute on your website for 2 hours a day, you see that the next day like in its fullness, and it's really cool because you can, it's addicting. Like I think you did mention that it was sort of like after a certain point, like you just see this progress, like you see it's building up, so you can look back in your progress like, oh, I went off this day, and I definitely have the capacity to do that today.
Yeah. And if I'm frustrated, I've got my second book I'm sending in for publishing. My third book, I've got the idea. I know exactly what it's going to be. I'm in the process of writing it. And then I've got all sorts of ideas in the back of my head. And whenever I kind of feel like, oh man, I don't want to write today, I just flip open to a random page on my first book and I reread it and I think, well, I wonder what type of inspiration I was off of that day. And there's something to be said. This applies to writing. I'm sure it applies to plenty of other things that someone might do, but at the time I was traveling around hiking in different places for work, and being in a different geographic location, seeing a different ecosystem, going from the Nevada desert to the rainforest of Washington to the beaches of North Carolina. I was having these different thoughts, having these different experiences. That was something that really benefited my creative process, was being in a different geographic location would just spark where it felt like ideas were coming out of nowhere. But everyone's got their own ways that help them work. But ultimately, with sacrifice for me, I just think that a lot of people have conversations with me about how that there's things that they want to accomplish in their life, there's things that they want to do, and then the first thing that they do is that they immediately are bringing up excuses. And so I just think, is what you're doing a part of the problem or the solution? So I just try to make everything that I do make my life better. And in my relationships with other people, I always try to think, is that other person's life better because I'm in it? And when you start doing that, the karma of it and what comes back to you is very surprising. It took me a long time to learn that you really do. Even the people who are angry, who are frustrated, who are mean, those are the people that need love the most. And I think that, you do have to sacrifice your comfort in order to do that. Yeah,
for sure. One of the most inspiring things, and I think this can be inspiring for anyone across the board, is that I've misattributed so many quotes to philosophers, or psychologists, so I'm not gonna try to do it this time. But there is one particular psychologist that said, whatever, like, your attention is your future self manifesting itself in the present. So let's just say, like, you're doing, like, you give yourself to your website, like, that is your future self, like, coming into the present. So it's like a very visceral present way of understanding how your efforts are actually working for you. So to me, that was really impactful, and I hope that is impactful to someone else. But I want to go to the one thing you said about inspiration from your geographic location, because you get to travel a lot, and you've been to 48 out of 50 states.
Mm-hmm.
So is that the most, like, potent form of inspiration, like your environment, or?
Honestly, yeah, for me, I think there is something that unleashes my curiosity in seeing something for the first time, especially if I'm out in nature, like going to be able to see a particular interesting thing in nature. There's something about it that gets my mind running. It excites me. It's what I really value in life. It's what brings me the most euphoria. And in going to 48 states around the country, most of it by myself, I felt different frequencies in different places from the people and from the location, and those are incredibly valuable. And now when I meet a random person, no matter where they're from in America, unless they're from North Dakota or Alaska, it's less than 1% chance. I would love to go to both those places, but less than 1% chance. Any random American I meet, I can say, oh, wow, I've been to this spot of your state. It's incredibly lovely. Have you been out there? And that, to me, having that segue makes me feel like I'm invincible in conversation, where I can go and talk to whoever I want, and I'll have something that they're familiar with that I can bring up. Yeah. And I might even mirror the frequency that I felt when I was there. That, certain people are very, very proud to be from the state they're from, and there's a culture of that state that they're from. And I picked up on that in visiting those places, and it's completely changed my relationships with people. When I meet someone from a particular place, I now have been there. And there are other ways to get inspiration, but yeah, honestly, for me, like seeing something that's super interesting and very unique to, what I grew up in Ohio, when I'm in the middle of a canyon in Arizona, and the canyon's thousands of feet. Those experiences for me, they were kind of always what I was searching for when I was a kid, where I was like, I really don't know, what my purpose is, or where I should put myself, or what I should do to make myself feel the way that I want to feel. And it's different for everyone, and I think that's important to keep in mind. But definitely going to different geographic locations, most of which was through work. I was going to build natural and grow natural. It helped me grow as a person, and I think that even on just a backpacking trip or a road trip or a vacation to the beach, there's a lot that you pick up from the new frequency of some place that you go visit.
For sure. And I think doing that with intention is pretty important, not just like going there on vacation just to relax. It seems like you take it a step further and you like really immerse yourself in that area.
Yeah, I mean, with my hiking habit, something I really like to do is just get isolated, walk 10 miles in a direction no one else would be, and read somewhere. And ultimately, I do think that there's something to be said about like being happy where you are, like having a place, having a consistent place that you are. I definitely think there's something to be said for that. I've strayed the line on the opposite end of that too far, where I've been traveling for so long that but yeah, ultimately at the end of the day, I think that everyone can benefit from experience something that they are unfamiliar with, because in our lives it's very easy to get complacent, to go through the motions, and there should always be, from my perspective, this has been super beneficial, something in each day that's unique to that day. You don't want to have a cookie cutter day ever, at least me. When I start doing that is when the euphoria, my general happiness, my joy in life, that's when those start to. So I always try to put something new in every day that I've yet to do.
I feel that for sure. I don't know what specifically you said that triggered this, but when you were writing your book, 350 pages, it seems like you're pretty used to articulating your thoughts, theories, ideas, and feelings. How has that affected your mental state and you processing emotions, if any?
Well, at first, because I've always had, the voice in my head has always gone very quickly, and it's always been super curious. I used to be super annoying as a young child because I would ask a million questions to my brother's friends. They're 8 and 10 years older than me. Like, they were in high school. Here I am, kindergarten, first grade, asking them 50 questions about, where they're going to go to college and what they're going to do with their life. So I've always kind of been that way. And, for me, you don't want to be a hyper intellectual. There's a time for it. If you're with someone who's receptive to it, feel comfortable to practice complete intellectual autonomy and say all the things that you're thinking. But then on the other hand, you have to have the opposite side, which is just sitting somewhere and enjoying time with somebody. You don't want to be the person who's always trying to jam philosophical perspectives and ideas down someone's throat. So I think, ultimately read the room. But as far as processing my emotions, it's like, at first I had a lot of thoughts running through my head, and I kind of had to accustom myself to it. But then on top of that, as I started learning more, I started figuring out how to use those and how to channel them to get what I wanted in life. So it was like when I was writing my book, I was telling myself, I'm going to publish this and it's going to become a bestseller, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make that happen. And that was the type of mindset that I was in constantly. I was always telling myself, I basically thought of what I wanted, constantly told myself that, and then, here it comes some shiny day in the future.
Mm-hmm.
To dedicate yourself enough to accomplish it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think what you said about not being hyper intellectual all the time is one of the most important life skills. Like, I think, like, one of my friends had this critique of someone after, like, we went to a party, and they said, like, this dude's cool and all, and he can, like, hold a conversation, but he doesn't know how to be a bro. And that alone makes you, like, not want to hang out with that person. So it's definitely a balance, and I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, and there are certainly people who need to stray further along the other end, where all they do is grow, and then they forget that they're, they're just becoming everyone else that they're around and not thinking for themselves. There's something to be said about when you go and talk to someone, the things that they're saying to you the first time that you've ever heard them. I think that's definitely good. And, if someone wants to talk astrophysics with me, if they know me, they know I'm super down for something like that. But you just kind of have to be receptive with people. I always tell people, like, pay attention to mirror neurons in yourself, where if you go and you have the conversation with someone and you just see them for the first time, you're like, hey, how's it going? And they're like, yo, what's up, man? You can respond, nothing much, I've just been working. And then also if they go, oh, how's it going, dude? You'll be like, going pretty well, man. What's new with you? Trying to, meet people where they're at. It doesn't mean you have to change who you are, but I definitely think there's a way that you can pick the side of yourself that fits the conversation best with that person, rather than selfishly saying exactly what you want in that moment, which you're perfectly welcome to do that whenever you want. But I think usually what you'll find is if you meet someone where you're at, they'll bring you further down their own rabbit holes.
Yes. And I think it's important that you mentioned that mirroring to me is not an inauthentic act. Mirroring, I think, is part of, like, the social contract. Unless, like, if you want to be, like, socializing like at its highest form, I think requires that level of mirroring that you said. So yes,
Yeah.
for sure. What you said about thinking about completing the book and then here it comes, that reminded me of Think and Grow Rich, which is a very popular book. So
Yeah, I have that on my queue. I haven't read it yet. I'm still waiting on it.
Really?
Yeah, so many people. Napoleon Hill. So many people want it that I'm waiting
That's
on.
insane.
It was kind of similar to a concept in The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. Kind of like a book on manifestation. They actually made it into a movie too. I'd recommend it to anyone that's interested in kind of bringing about what they want in their own life. You know, I think we with the modern world that we live in, with how often people are on their cell phones, with how often people are using computers and just looking at screens in general, I think it's super important to recognize the voice that is speaking to you in your head, because the mistake that some people make is they take that voice as the truth every time, as if they have to listen to it every time. But I truthfully find that to be slightly psychotic in the sense that you don't want to do most of the things that you think about.
Yeah.
You're going, like, you want to say no to yourself the vast majority of times. And you want, when you say yes, you want it to be because that's actually what you want to do. You don't want to make the mistake of thinking that that voice is actually who you are. And it can happen very easily. And I definitely think there's something that you want in life. You definitely need to be telling yourself constantly, I am going to get that. And when you do that, the way that you're going to do it presents itself a lot easier. Bring it up with your friends more often. They might even give you something where you can run off that.
For sure.
But, you know, you got to be careful. You can set your mindset, or it can set itself. So I always try to be conscious and proactive about going and basically telling myself what I'm going to think for that day or for that year.
I know a lot of people who see The Secret and they think it's like non-scientifical. So I just want to do a quick devil's advocate and say that.
Yeah, it has a super low rating on Goodreads. I know.
Yeah, it's weird because for me personally, like I have a chemistry degree and it requires me obviously by definition to be super empirical. Yeah. And so I understand that.
Here, if I were in your shoes and I were like trying to be an empirical scientist, which I'm not, I studied finance in school. I only took a few earth science classes. But if I were to try to be objective about it, there are parts of it where she says, you know, I saw a jacket in the store. This isn't exactly, but it was something along the lines of, I saw a jacket in a store that I really liked. I was thinking about it all the time. I manifested having it, and then my husband gave it to me. That I don't like as much because you're being presented something that exactly the way you want it, and it's a good analogy. But I think the purpose of it is that you first have to answer the question of, if I could give myself anything that I wanted, what would that be? And most people are living under the perspective of, oh, well, even if I could get that, it'd probably be too difficult for me to accomplish, and it probably would never happen.
Right.
So starting from the mindset of it's going to happen, and like you were saying, I am not going to quit until I'm 6 feet under. When you have that perspective, you do become slightly more invincible, and you do build up your ability to kind of do all the different steps that you would need to do to get where you want to be. But I definitely understand why people suggest The Secret's of pseudoscience. But I think that's kind of putting your own spin on it rather than kind of like taking in the insight that she has, because I mean that book has created millionaires. That book has gotten people out of the deepest, darkest depressions that you could ever imagine, and it's a simplistic life philosophy. But I could see how it could be portrayed as a pseudoscience and how aspects of it are not objectively empirical. But it's the mindset behind it that I think is valuable, which is, you're much more likely to get what you want if you're thinking that you will get it.
Yes. So the one thing I do want to say is that I do agree in the validity of the mindset. So it's not that I don't believe in the like esoteric side of it, but I think there's, like what you said, is that if you're always thinking about it, like your mind, like you're going to get environmental cues, like you're going to interpret things that someone says in a way that aids what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
So it's like when that's constantly on your mind, like you are going to bring about and interpret things that are going to aid that. So in a way, it seems like this thing is gravitating towards you, but that's just because like your mind is letting go of these filters that used to think that it's impossible. So it's information that could help me won't spring from that. So like what you said before is that, listening to people as if they know something you don't. That's sort of like what happens when you undergo that mindset. So,
Yeah, yeah. I definitely think it's an intellectual problem. Social media has definitely proliferated this, which is the idea that people think that they are somehow intellectually enlightened in comparison to other people.
mhm.
And I think that's a huge problem because I think about myself. I think about how much someone might know about me. Even the people that I share the most with about my life, and I'm pretty open. I'm an open book. They don't know 5 to 10% of the things I've done, the things I think, who I am. And so to make that presumption, to have a conversation with someone and already know, oh, well, I'm not going to get anything out of this. Even if you disagree with what you're saying, there's things to learn there. So, yeah, I definitely think it's super, super important not to cast people out. I'm a big believer in, no matter who it is, giving them the time of day, because you never know what can come out of anything.
I agree. For sure. What did I want to say about Think and Grow Rich? That's one of those books that, there are a lot of like self-help books as such they have a bad rep. And
Yeah,
I
I
know,
don't think that. I don't like that they do because each popular classic self-help book, someone could give you the concrete example of how their life has changed and benefited as a result of that being written. So people hate it because it isn't sophisticated usually. It isn't overly philosophical. A lot of the times, maybe you won't even use what they say. But I would say I've probably read 30 or 40 of them. My favorite book that I've ever read is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and I'm sure that you could pull that into the self-help category. But I would be the first to tell you how it has completely improved my life. And so you're right. There is the secret, getting the pseudoscience, non-objective perspective. There are self-help books. Getting the oh, well, that's a waste of your time, and do you really want to follow that person's directions? But it ultimately comes down to you don't have to agree with everything that you hear. But I am always a believer in the more that you put on your plate, the more that you introduce yourself to, the more that you think about. You don't necessarily have to take it with you forever, but the idea cross your mind. It's how a lot of your best ideas started, and if you're closed-minded to it, might hurt you. But I know where you're coming from. They definitely they catch a lot of shade on the internet.
yeah, I think when I first started reading heavy my junior year of college, and then I started reading like a book a week. And when I was on that tear, I had a lot of friends who they asked me what type of book it was. And when I said, I guess you can kind of construe it as a self-help book, that's when they just turned off. And oh, I don't read self-help books. Then I had to spend my time thinking about like, I didn't even like, I went into it without that impression at all. But now that I'm labeling it like that, that's when they turn off. So from that point on, I'm like, okay, like it's a completely unfair thing because books like The Power of Now, How to Win Friends and Influence People, like these like classic self-help books that are super famous to the point where they almost become a meme, are actually like some of the things that are said in that book are insane.
Yeah, let me look. I keep different shelves of all the books I've read, like the categories are in. So I know every self-help book I've ever read, and I have it recorded here. But I definitely think it's one of the genres of books that you should not go without. I think it's one of the genres of books that you should have more of them than the other books. And ultimately the reason that I say that is because one, they're shorter, they're usually easier to understand. You can go through them quickly. They're interesting. It gets you reading. And two, even if you take one thing away from 5 hours of reading through a self-help book, you never know what that investment of time can do for you. Right. And if you want to cast self-help out of your repertoire of things that you're gonna read through, like, go ahead, it's not really much. But I do think you are missing out on one of the categories of writing, which is people who will. A lot of times, self-help books are people who have achieved something that you want to do, and they say, "Hey, here is a toolbox of how you can do exactly what you want to do," which to me is one of the main purposes of the book. So, I'm
Okay.
always hesitant to scrutinize. I think generally it's a reflection of someone's internal chemistry rather than actually describing the thing they're.
I agree. I there is a like just for an example, like I would say the first like I read Gary V's Crushing It and I learned probably nothing. Like when I look back,
Oh,
I'm
really?
like I don't know of anything and that was like my first one. So I'm like I
Yeah,
don't know if I'm into self-help books.
yeah,
But then I read Think and Grow Rich and I like dude, I felt like I was learning like a magic spell when I was reading Think and Grow Rich. I was like, bro, like this is insane. I couldn't put it down. And
yeah,
so I think you have to catch one. You have to catch the wave, and then once you catch the wave, then you sort of have the motivation to keep going.
yeah. I always hear with reading, it's read what you love until you love to read. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
and that's definitely how it's happened with me. I've now read 550-page book on dinosaurs simply because I love reading it, and I have all sorts of different subjects that are like that. And every time I pick up something new. But some self help books that I would recommend to someone who maybe feels complacent, maybe feels like they want something in their life. And it obviously sounds bad to become a spokesperson for them on the internet, but at the same time, these have been super helpful for me, so might as well.
Yeah.
Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, Good to Great by James Collins, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, that one's super famous.
Mm.
4 Hour Work Week, Tim Ferriss, Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg, Essentialism, Greg McKeown, Extreme Ownership, Jocko Willink, Grit, Angela Duckworth, that one's super cool, The Power of Passion and Perseverance, Unshakable, Tony Robbins, 12 Rules for Life, Jordan Peterson, The Four Agreements, Miguel Ruiz, that one's
Yeah.
super popular, and you could read that in one sitting, and I'd recommend everyone read it. The Secret, Deep Work by Cal Newport, but I could keep going on and on. Like this list keeps going on, but each one of those, like some of those have made me thousands of dollars simply by I'm 24, I'm smart enough to know that I don't know that much, and here is something new that I've learned that completely changes the way that I live life. So self help books get hate, especially from the lit heads, the people who are super into literature and want to feel like they're better than you.
Oh yeah.
I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's worthwhile to at least keep it in the rotation.
For sure. Just to vouch for you, Extreme Ownership is insane. 12 Rules for Life is insane. Think and Grow Rich for sure. If
Yeah,
you
yeah.
want to go 80-20,
I'm
I
excited
think
to
12
get to it. I've had like 10 people tell me I need to read it. So
okay. I think 12 Rules for Life is honestly one of those 80-20 books. Like if you want to know a lot about self-help, that's one of those books if you sit down and you read it word for word and you sort of like distill each paragraph, you
yeah,
can walk away with that. You can walk away from that with a lot.
he's got a book called Maps of Meaning, which is more of a psychological book. It's more
Mm-hmm.
recent and big commitment. I think 570 pages, but I just finished it a few weeks ago, and that's kind of a conversation in the map and the territory, which is super helpful for not necessarily self-help as far as accomplishment in life, but establishing your mindset and your values and how you're going to spend your time. It's a super good book, and I'd recommend that one too. Jordan
Okay.
Peterson. I'm happy to hear his health is doing better. I know he's had a tough
Oh
time.
yeah, he just came around. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah. This isn't a self-help book, but I really like The Alchemist. Have you read The Alchemist?
yeah,
Yeah. The Alchemist is also one of those books that you can read in one sitting, and depending on who you are, it can be life-changing.
yeah. I think that for that, it's like you question how far along in the journey are you.
Yeah.
I always try to have the mindset of day one, because it keeps me excited. I think that people our age, they get to the point where they feel like they've already done the thing, and now it's just like kind of being, they've already established who they are. They already know who they are. I like to think of each new day as an opportunity to continue on the path and see how far I can go.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a classic book. Definitely one where someone's getting into reading. You want to throw that one. Sure.
Yeah. So I think since we're The Alchemist is sort of like an esoteric book, I have one big question for you, and that's what's your take on what the meaning of life is?
I think it's different for everyone, and I think that if you truly listen to yourself, if you honestly are genuine with your soul, that it will present yourself to it so long as you are doing the things that are necessary for it to come to fruition. some people, their meaning of life might even be just to be comfortable. And to each their own. But I am not like that. The meaning of life for me is feeling like I'm flowing, like everything's coming naturally, like I'm not going out of my way to do something that isn't who I am. And then it also comes to being in the right place at the right time. Am I truly being honest with where I want to be, with how I want to be, with the people that I'm doing this life with? Are those genuinely the people that I want to move forward with? I think the meaning of life ultimately comes down to being honest with yourself and having the guts to go out and do the things that you know that you should be doing in your heart of hearts. Because a lot of people are going to get to the end of their life and they're going to say, man, I wish I was a musician. And with me, I thought that exact same thing when I was graduating college. It was kind of going through the different routes that I could go with in my life. And I thought, if I don't fully invest myself in creating this company, I don't double down and try and get it to 1 million people, if I don't go and see all the cool, magnificent places around the world that I've always dreamt of exploring, then I feel like by the time I get to retirement age, I'm going to say, oh my gosh, I didn't do it. And so it takes a lot of courage to step up and to accept your meaning of life, to know what it is, and to actually go out there and do it. But I think the values in myself that have drawn me closer to it, definitely honesty, definitely integrity, definitely respect of other people. Like the more I've come from the standpoint of, like I said, making other people's lives better, the more it comes back to me. But everyone's going to have their own meaning of life, and you can't knock them for that. They have complete autonomy over whatever it is that is going to provide meaning.
Right. I think. Oh, keep going. My bad.
I'll end it on this. There's a perfect balance of the hyper intellectual, which is constantly reading, constantly learning, constantly figuring things out. And then there is the bro side, which is actually enjoying your time in the people you're with.
Yes. So I want to say I agree with all that, and I think, at the very least, I think there is a subtle meaning to life for everyone, and that's always engaging in a new experience. I think you are lying to yourself, like you are breaching the integrity if you try to convince yourself that you've seen everything, and there's nothing really that's out there for you. So when you say like to each their own, I agree, but I just want to add like this annoying caveat that as long as that person really, really, really thinks that, then that's okay. But if there's like 1% of them that sort of doubts that, then it's like you owe it to yourself to keep trying and finding something else. And I think
you can light that spark underneath your friend and say, hey, I know what you're doing right now is not you. And I know that you should be doing this. And I know that if you woke up every day and you dedicated yourself to doing what you actually want to do, you're great at it, that you could do it. And sometimes maybe you do have to say to your friend who, and it's easy when you're going on a path that isn't in the direction that you want to go. You think to yourself, oh, well, it would take longer to turn around. Sometimes you have to be that friend that is willing to step into that uncomfortable situation and say, hey, I really don't think you're going the right way. And sometimes they're going to say, actually, yes, I am. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I brought it up. But then other times they're going to turn around and they're going to go the way that you said. And they're going to say, thank God that someone was on the outside and could see. But, you don't want to be overbearing of people in their own lives. So you obviously got to give them their autonomy. But I think a good friend is willing to speak up and let someone know when they veered off the path that would lead them to, what they would find true meaning in their life and happiness and joy.
For sure. And I think I've been in the position where someone tried to stop me and try to, push me different direction. And I always met it with like a subtle form of hostility and I felt offended. But at the end of the day, anyone who does that is doing that out of love. It's not because
you might even disagree with 80 to 90% of the people that do that, but there is no reason to censor it.
Yes.
You might as well listen even if you.
Yeah. And I think lastly is authenticity, because you are born, there aren't two Patricks, and I think you're doing it a major disservice to yourself and to other people who will get inspired if they see the real you. Because if you go through as a drone, and even if you go through life and you are sort of yourself, but you don't actually end up doing the thing, like you said, like some people, like even you, like you wanted to be a musician. So it's like that one aspect of you that you never gave a chance could have been the one thing that gave you, not only gave you fulfillment, but also inspired the people that you loved around you. So yeah, for sure.
Well, I guess, what I would leave you on in that case is your in your life, you have to make a decision. You can't just do nothing. You have to make a decision. And you want to go into each decision that you make with as much information. And if you get to be my age, if you get to be 24 and you feel complacent, you feel like, oh, wow, well, maybe they're meant to be doing this. Not. It's never too late. It's never too late. And you may have missed your prime. Like, you definitely want to hit things at the right time. But I think people definitely have the tendency of cutting life off far too early. And
Yes.
you can go down multiple doors. People end up starting their passion in life at 28 all the time. Maybe it lasts for 30 years. But ultimately, I think that you're much more likely to find what that is if you have the open-mindedness to try out a bunch of different things at the expense of failing, at the expense of looking like an idiot, at the expense of wasting time while someone else is getting ahead on their path. If they already know their path, don't get self-conscious about it. That has nothing to do with you.
Mm-hmm. I think what you said that is, I think Future was in his early 30s when he did his XXL cypher.
Nice. I love Future. I've seen him twice.
Wow.
I'm all about him.
Okay. Yeah, dude. So it's like, and like 2 Chainz is old as shit, but I know that Future for sure. It's like your freshman cypher, you're going into it is like an early 30s.
Yeah.
And it's like that's just one of those things. It's like if Future got what's it called, like dismayed by all like the Playboy Cardis and stuff who are going through it, like their teens, then like so many people thrive off of Future's music, like what I mean. Like
I just read the Gucci Mane Guide to Greatness.
Oh, I bought that. I haven't read it yet. How is it?
Yeah, you're gonna love it because he talks about his story of losing 100 pounds, how he did it, the mindset behind it, and ultimately what he said that stuck with me, and it has nothing to do with weight loss, which is you are only competing with yourself, which is super, super cliche, of course. But he goes to explain how he went from getting his sustenance from being a drug dealer to being off drugs to exercising all the time to having a great diet, to drinking enough water, to being a good husband. All of these things where he slowly flips simply by changing one thing.
One thing at a time. So you said?
Yeah. I think you'll really like his book, and I think that you already have some of the lessons from your weight loss journey that you've probably already picked up as well, because he does describe it in a very honest and straightforward way.
Okay.
But
that's cool.
I think you'll like it a lot.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm super grateful that we kind of sat down and had this conversation. I'm perfectly comfortable with you airing all of it. I thought that there wasn't a single thing that we talked about that wasn't appropriate or at least valuable to someone. Cool. And beyond that, I'm just grateful you're doing this. I think it's always interesting to see what people say when you give them the opportunity to have a little stream of consciousness.
Cool. Thank you for saying that. I'm grateful for your time today. I also want to say one thing is that, like the inspiration that I gained from you spending the time writing that book. I mean, I started not writing a book, but I started doing like a journal / book of some sorts based off of that. And that made me, I would say the impact of that is measurable in a positive way. So yeah. So shout out to you for that. So
yeah, well, when you're on the way to publishing it, I can help you kind of get that done. And as far as looking over it,
thank you, dude. All right, that's dope. So if you made it this far, thank you for staying. Patrick, do you want to plug Natural?
Yeah. So whatever state around the country you're from, follow Natural California, Natural Ohio, Natural New York on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and then if you want to check out my book, it's Utopian Logic on Amazon.
Alrighty.
Yeah, we got my second book coming out here in the next couple months.
Perfect. All right. Those links will be in the description. All right. Well, peace, everyone.